I'm Daniel Levine, and this is the Bio Report. Tomasz Sablinski believes the drug development process is broken and has sought to reinvent it. His company, Transparency Life Sciences, relies on crowdsourcing to design its clinical trials, makes all of its data public, and employs digital technologies to remotely monitor participants and dramatically reduce the cost of studies. Now, several years into his efforts, we checked in with Sablinski, CEO of Transparency, about the progress he's made, what barriers he's encountered, and whether his success is having any impact on the way other companies are conducting drug development today. Tomasz, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, thanks.
It's been about 3 years since we last spoke about Transparency Life Sciences. You were just getting started back then with your effort to remake the drug development process. Perhaps you can begin by describing Transparency to our listeners who may not be familiar with it.
Sure. So Transparency is based on three principles. One is very obvious from our name. We are doing drug development, designing and conducting clinical trials in a completely transparent way. Everything that can be from ethical and privacy and legal point of view made visible to anyone who wants to see it is visible. So that's transparency. The second component is open sourcing or crowdsourcing, which translates to the fact that we are co-designing our experiments, our clinical trials with as broad as feasible participation of patients, researchers, and anyone who can and wants to contribute. And the third component, very important from operational perspective, is that we are moving clinical trials to patients rather than asking patients to travel sometimes long way to where trials are located. So we're changing the model from brick and mortar site visits to telemonitoring and digitizing clinical trials.
When we last spoke, you described the drug development process as broken beyond repair. What's broken, and is it fixable, or does it need to be overhauled from the ground up?
So I think everyone recognizes that it's broken, and so the diagnosis is made the same way almost no matter to whom you talk to. However, depending on using medical parable here, depending on your specialty, which pretty much translates to whether you belong to big pharma, biotech, venture capital, or others specialties, the treatment prescribed differs. And perhaps because of my own background as a surgeon, I am of the opinion that only radical solutions can save this industry, and I am not interested in prescription written by dermatologists or internal medicine people, which tend to be point solutions in this space. So people are trying to fix one aspect of current or legacy model, and that doesn't bring, and have been trying to do that for a number of years, but that doesn't bring necessary results and what are the necessary results? Perhaps we should start with that. What is the goal of this overhaul? So first, if you look at statistics of clinical trials, clinical research, it's devastating to realize that year on year, cost of conducting clinical trials goes up by 10%. And you would think, well, if this costs more, perhaps it's done faster, perhaps we get better results, perhaps we deliver more medications at the back end through FDA approval and to patients. But the irony is, the more it costs, the worse it gets. So there is no other sector of the economy that would actually survive, and drug development somehow survives, but I think it's on its last leg. So a systemic solution is needed, and a systemic solution needs to bring clinical trials to its roots, where experiments were simpler, where patients were not subject to something that they simply from logistical perspective cannot agree to, and it needs to be brought to some sustainable budget. And I think our conservative estimate and estimate of others is that if you improve the system or overhaul the system, it can be done.
As you mentioned, there are three key elements to your approach. I wonder if we can take a little deeper dive there, starting with the idea of open data. Why is that important? How does it fit into what you're doing?
I think one of the problems with drug development is lack of trust of people who are participants and who are in fact at the end of this process customers for and users of products that were developing medication. And opening up the process of designing and conducting clinical trials to them builds trust and builds their conviction that, and sometimes their health and risk that's associated with clinical trials is done in a responsible way and for reasons that they can understand. And that has been a growing problem with the industry. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect, equally important but on different dimension, is you cannot, in modern world, design a product, any product, without significant input of end users. And that's true with simple stuff such as car that you buy in a dealership. You can certainly choose a lot of more and less important aspects of what you want in this car, and all the way to complex solutions such as enterprise software, where people have a choice what to do, and frequently what they buy, and often participate in design of this product. So ironically, where it matters most, which is medications that you are going to be taking sometimes for life, the industry completely turned their back on end users. And there were many reasons for this unfortunate outcome, but that's the status today. It's recognized by health authorities, by the FDA. It's recognized also by the industry.
The second aspect you mentioned was crowdsourcing. Who makes up the crowd that you're calling on, and how are you using this to reinvent trial design?
It's patients, it's physicians, it's researchers, and the way we constructed this tool to solicit feedback is in a form of what we call protocol builder, which asks basic and also detailed questions on clinical trial design, and they range between simple, seemingly simple items such as inclusion, exclusion criteria, demographics of patients going in, all the way to complexity of pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics, and statistical approaches. So we have two versions of protocol builder for each of our projects. One is designed specifically with patients in mind and uses language that patients understand. And the other one is for professionals, for researchers, which obviously ask certain questions that would be fairly difficult to understand by non-professionals.
And how do you sort out the good ideas from the bad ones?
Oh, that is something that fortunately we do not have to invent. Crowdsourcing or open sourcing has been around for many years now and is accepted way of conducting business in many industries. And there are different methodologies to do it. But one thing that needs to be made clear is that it's not a voting system in which, for example, in our latest endeavor, we design a protocol for rare disease sarcoidosis in pulmonary sarcoidosis, which we are going to the FDA with IND in a couple of weeks. And this was co-designed by over 200, close to 250 patients and some 50 researchers. And it's not done, our analysis is not done the way that if most people said this, that will go to the protocol. It's looking for refinement of certain points that we, in our initial exposure to those stakeholders, were not sure about how to deal with. And in this particular case, there are several aspects of clinical protocol that are controversial. And we're looking also from so-called left field ideas that somebody will come up with really unusual suggestions and solutions. And then once this is all done, and by the way, we're still doing it manually, but we're working on a artificial intelligence type of system that will be aiding this process. Then ultimately the decision is made what goes in front of regulators in the final protocol. It's done by principal investigator and a couple of key opinion leaders. So the system, the end of the system is not very different than what it is now in legacy structure. It's just that it's much broader input that we're getting.
The third aspect that you mentioned was the use of digital technologies for remote monitoring. What kind of savings have you realized at this point, and are there other benefits beyond cost savings of using this approach?
I'll start with the context here because it's quite important to remember that when we spoke 3 years ago, telemedicine was still the word that many people confused with telemarketing, I guess. And now most people understand what telemedicine is, and it's a broad concept which includes something as trivial as video consultation, and some specialties are moving pretty rapidly to it as a way of delivering healthcare. So video consultations is it's easy, and then through more and more sophisticated technologies, you can go all the way up to monitoring increasingly complex physiological parameters, because tools, devices to collect those parameters are being developed, and many FDA approved almost on a weekly basis. So it's almost sky is the limit what one will be able to do. So, excuse me. So that's the context in which we operate today versus 3 years ago, and we are creating a system and a culture in the company that will enable us to plug in any of those devices or tools that are being developed not for clinical trials for the most part, but for healthcare service. And I can mention many that we are either deploying in our currently recruiting and planned clinical trials, such as um, simple body weight through obviously monitoring vital signs, sleep quality, and remote or digital EKG, and all, pulmonary function tests. All these things in legacy systems require patients to drive or sometimes fly to study centers several times in the course of clinical trial, typically every 4, every 6, sometimes every 2 weeks. And that's a big barrier for many patients. Now, if you move many of those measurements to patients' home, you obviously reduce patient burden. The cost of data collection uh, goes down by at least 50 and probably close to 80%. So patient convenience, quantitative benefit of cost. But there is one more aspect that we've just began exploring and experiencing is qualitative benefit. Many of those devices enable us to measure certain things that were not uh, logistically possible in legacy systems. Because if you measure it every 6 weeks, it would be meaningless. Now, if you can measure it every 6 hours, then becomes meaningful and allows us to construct different endpoints in clinical trials. So this is the journey that we just began, and we were discussing certain aspects of this qualitative benefits in certain therapeutic areas with the FDA and key opinion leaders.
Well, how have regulators viewed your approach, and did you face any barriers winning acceptance? Have they warmed to this?
I wouldn't say that I wouldn't say that they warmed to it because they were never called in the first place. I differ in my opinion about FDA versus industry, and I think that the barrier to innovation was not the industry. It was excuse for the industry to be innovative to blame FDA. So our first clinical trial that is now in recruiting stage, we submitted IND, which just to give you an example, it's a 12-month trial in multiple sclerosis, which typically in legacy system would have 12 site visits. We reduced in our trial this visit to 2, the first and the last. In 12 months between first and last visit, everything, including biometric data, is collected at patient's home. Visits are conducted via video using nothing more sophisticated than either FaceTime, Skype, or GoToMeeting type of tools. FDA accepted this protocol. We have open IND. There were no questions asked. In fact, the letter from the FDA, the trial can proceed, contained certain encouraging examples how to move forward even more forcefully into digitizing clinical trials. So that's our formal interaction. We had another one in the context of another trial in inflammatory bowel disease, which was equally encouraging, and we had a number of informal discussions with the regulatory agency, and also participated in industry panels with FDA staffers, and all of this is uniformly positive and encouraging. And similar signals, although we didn't pressure test it, we received from Europe. I was at a meeting in London last week and had a conversation with high-level official from UK drug approval agency, and everything we were discussing is ready to go in the UK whenever we're ready. So there are no barriers to it from regulatory perspective, as long as you keep everything ethical, transparent, and if it makes scientific sense.
You've been able to attract industry partners, including Genentech. How difficult was it to convince industry about your approach?
Um, so I think this is an um, interesting aspect. Uh, we uh, we were contacted by at least five or maybe seven of top 10 pharmaceutical companies, and we signed confidentiality agreements with them, and all of them came to us uh, via groups that I think all pharmaceutical companies formed within the last few years, and they have different names. The word innovation in the name of this group. So innovation in clinical trials, external innovation, and others. And obviously they all came to us excited about our approach, and we went some length in the discussion, and then this group told us, so we will now identify a project, real project in our pipeline that we could use to test your approach. And all of them at this stage uh, decided that it's either too early or too risky, or project teams said, well, we really don't want to risk. The only man left standing in this discussion was Genentech, and I give them a lot of credit for it. It wasn't easy internally, we know, for them to sell it, quote unquote, and they went on the record saying that. It took a long time, but here we are, and it's actually going to benefit both Genentech and us in different ways, that we learned a lot in the process, and obviously, because we are transparent, I hope it will also benefit drug development and ultimately patients, what we're doing with them. So it is not, it isn't easy, and I completely understand, having been in big pharma for many years, how difficult it is. It'll take a long time.
Oh, what does your pipeline look like today?
We have one proprietary project which is repurposed generic for multiple sclerosis, and it's a very interesting commercial potential. In fact, even though it's generic, we were working on a trial that will be done in completely novel way, as I explained, and not only reducing the cost of clinical trials per se dramatically, but also we will be able to collect certain data that typically have not been collected in multiple sclerosis clinical trials, and we are quite convinced that there will be benefits for patients, and perhaps even investors, which is hard to imagine that you can actually make that claim with repurposed generic. But that's obviously all hypothetical now, because we're just starting the trial. The second trial is a pilot with Genentech, which is testing novel methodologies of doing clinical trials in inflammatory bowel disease. Again, testing remote way of collecting data, including, which may surprise a lot of people, colonoscopy done in local offices, so patients do not have to travel to sites where clinical trials, quote unquote, located. And then we are established partnership with Oven Therapeutics, New York-based drug developer. We are in final stages of assembling an IND application. That's a new chemical entity that is phase 3 trial for one rare disease, and we are now testing a second indication, which is, as I mentioned, pulmonary sarcoidosis. And again, here we've taken big benefits from open sourcing or crowdsourcing the protocol, and now we are hoping that this trial can be conducted with collection of data largely via telemedicine. And the pipeline is also being enhanced now by in-licensing discussions, and 3 or 4 are active. This would be new chemical entities to which we are aiming to get full or partial rights.
You're currently seeking your first venture round. Why now, and how is the money going to be used?
We have financed the company largely through internal resources and some revenues from partnerships. And it is the stage at which we have a platform that is highly scalable, so we can absorb multiple projects into it, and that's obviously limited by cash. So we would like to raise enough money to be able to in-license and run through proof of concept and perhaps beyond several projects. So the proceeds will be used to acquire and develop several new drugs. And obviously, some of this money is going to go into improvement and enhancement of our platform, which we are happy with, but there is obviously a lot of improvement that can be made on the backside, if you will, of what drives both crowdsourcing platform and also collection of data itself.
Any sense that others are taking note of your approach and following? Do you expect to see what you're doing influence drug development more broadly?
Yes and no. I think if you take the 3 components that we believe position us uniquely because of the holistic approach, the systemic solution. You design, you conduct with open source and transparently, and telemonitor patients. That's transparency life sciences. Now, there are certain aspects of clinical research process that the industry was forced to make more transparent, and one that is obviously quite hotly debated is release of data from clinical trials and strong motivation, if that is the right word for the industry, in particular in Europe, to disclose data from all trials, including trials that failed. And I am strong supporter of this, and there is pushback for obvious reasons. So some transparency is introduced into the process. But no one, to our knowledge, is co-designing clinical trials the way we do, where everybody can actually see what we do, and the final protocol is on the website. So that is still treated as a trade secret for reasons that are hard to defend, in fact. If you look at, so that's transparency and crowdsourcing, co-designing. Co-designing of clinical trials with patients is getting some traction, but mostly not straight from the industry, but from patient advocacy group and from a movement that is probably best described as DYO, do your own science, which I think is very different than what we do, because the people are constructing their own experiments, and they're not FDA sanctioned, and typically they look either at behavioral changes or approved drugs or some other interventions like dietary interventions. So, but it creates a certain culture of people actually contributing to clinical trials. And the third aspect of it, which is telemonitoring, that is clearly on the radar screen of pharmaceutical industry. However, their approach is again so cautious that they would create point solutions. So they will do a legacy type of trial and put one or two biometric devices where they collect digital data. I think it's a waste of time because it will not bring certain. It doesn't do really much good because these devices are already FDA approved. So for the most part, so I'm not sure what is being tested. The device is not that doesn't need testing. If they're trying to find out whether it is doable in clinical trial anywhere, any differently than in healthcare services, you don't need it. You just need, but it is so difficult because it requires changing the whole paradigm how we collect data. So that's why it's so difficult to do by pharma. So I gave you a long answer. Yes, there are certain aspects that industry is implementing, but no one is doing it in a way that we do. And just wanted to mention one thing about patients co-designing and patients contributing to design of clinical trials. I think the announcement of Apple Research Kit that was just released last week in its pilot is probably most significant announcement in clinical development in the last 10, if not 20 years. Really? I think it's going to be tectonic shift. For us, for example, it's a fantastic way of being able to create a tool that will basically be a clinical trial management system that will cost a small fraction of what you are forced to pay from commercial vendor or build yourself. So we're at the edge of real, I think, transformation of this industry, and I think Transparency Life Sciences is very well positioned to benefit from the fact that it's happening, and also to be able to quickly translate it to better and less expensive and faster approved medication.
Tomasz Sablinski, CEO of Transparency Life Sciences. Tomasz, thanks as always.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Bye.
Thanks for listening. The Bio Report is a production of the Levine Media Group. To automatically download this podcast each week, subscribe to our RSS feed or through iTunes or other podcast manager. To join our mailing list, go to levinemediagroup.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to drop us a line or are interested in sponsoring this podcast, send email to danny@levinemediagroup.com. Special thanks to Jonah Levine, who composed our theme music, and the Jonah Levine Collective, which performs it.